for those of you that are not familiar with Chicago Hopes for Kids, so our organization works with families and children living in Chicago's homeless shelters. And we do that a variety of ways, but our mission really is to provide our students with the resources and encouragement needed to succeed academically despite the challenges of homelessness. And so something that we just wrapped up was our school supply drive, where we provide backpacks to all of our kiddos living at the shelters. We know this year learning will be remote, so we're really excited to see how that's going to go and how we can kind of fill in. And we'll talk a little bit more at the end of the session on how you can continue to get involved with Chicago Hopes for Kids. But before we get to that, I do want to introduce our speaker. So our speaker for today is Dr. Pavela Foster. She uses she, her pronouns. Thank you so much, Dr. Foster, for agreeing to help kick off our event. So this is part of a week-long series. So you can check out our website if you're interested in learning a little bit more about the other sessions and want to register. But just wanted to read a little bit about Dr. Foster before we get started. And so Dr. Foster is a native of Chicago's South Side. Dr. Foster began her post-secondary matriculation at Western Illinois University, earning a BA in Law Enforcement and Justice Administration. She continued her educational pursuit by earning a Master's of Arts in Mental Health Counseling from Argosy University and recently earned a Doctor of Education degree in Organizational Leadership from National Louis University. Dr. Foster's work experience directly parallels to her dissertation title, An Examination of Community Members' Reactions to Violent Viral Media and Their Perceptions of Its Impact on Black Communities. She dedicated 10 years to diligently working in the social justice, youth mental health field. Dr. Foster is currently the Director of Community Programs for Ignite, an organization serving young people ages 14 to 26 who experience homelessness in the city of Chicago and surrounding areas while overseeing the Drop-In Resource Center, outreach program, and aftercare program. Passionate about working with young people and helping them transition from trauma to triumph, she likewise currently sits on the board of directors for One Roof Chicago, a new and innovative program incorporating intergenerational supportive housing that focuses on workforce training for youth ages 18 and older and seniors identifying as LGBTQ. A proud member of Zeta Phi Beta Sorority Inc., Dr. Foster has willingly dedicated her time to community outreach through community cleanups and giveaways, team trainings through her own agency, providing nonviolent crisis intervention trainings, and has even committed her time to speaking up against racism through anti-racist protests in her community. She is, too, the creator of the GRIT podcast. GRIT stands for God, Resilience, Integrity, and Tenacity, which focuses on the lives and stories of Black men and women and their journeys of healing. She is also the proud mother of 2-year-old Sincere, who continues to motivate her work. So without further ado, I present to you Dr. Pavela Foster.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. I'm so pleased, and thank you guys from Chicago Hopes for Kids for inviting me to kick off your week. So I hope I do a justice in serving you guys this first day of this week-long training. But I want to be able to kind of start off. She talked about me being from the South Side of Chicago. I am a native. I grew up in Inglewood. I currently still stay in Inglewood and still work in Inglewood. So these are areas that I'm very familiar with, which is why this topic is very passionate to me. In my work with youth has been even more passionate than serving in the same communities that I grew up in. And so I want to be able to talk to you guys just a little bit. And so if I got any brave souls on here, I know our lives have been turned upside down in the last couple of months. And so virtual training is just horrible. But if I got any brave souls that would like to come on camera, please do so, because I'm very interactive and I want to try to make this as engaging as possible as I can. But I do want to let you guys know I don't just want to talk at you. I want you guys to talk with me, communicate with me. I learned from these type of trainings as well, as much as I'm teaching in those. And so I want to be able to talk to you guys during that time. I am going to share my screen, so I won't be able to see everybody, but please Feel free to stop me in the middle of my training. Please feel free to ask questions, drop them in the chat box. There's also at the bottom where you can go to reactions. You can raise your hands, you can clap your hands, whatever you may need to do to feel as much as engaged as you can. Please feel obligated to do so. And so we're going to jump right in because I don't believe in holding folks long, especially when things are virtual. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen so that you guys are able to see my presentation, and then we'll kick it off from there. There are some points where I'm going to play some videos that I think will help you understand a little bit more. If you have questions, please feel free to make sure that you stop or drop something in the chat box, okay? All righty. Right, and I'm going to make this big enough for everybody to see. All right, so Chicago's awful divide, understanding my zip code, my Blackness, and trauma. I named this title so that we understand a lot of different things, more so not just from a youth perspective, but from different levels of perspective of people who live in Chicago. And so, of course, zip codes kind of have gotten thrown all over the place because people can be living in one neighborhood and have an 847 number zip code that it doesn't necessarily match. But we will talk about some different zip codes as it relates to redlining and things of that nature. Okay. All right, so normally when I first start off of any of my trainings, because I work for Ignite, who serves young people who are experiencing homelessness, the first thing I do is I ask people to close their eyes. So if you can, just close your eyes, and most of you all are at home. So this will be pretty easy for you. And I want you to think about, what does home mean to you? What does it feel like when you're at home? What's your favorite place when you're at home? And what are you doing? Okay. And I'm going to ask you to think prior to our pandemics that's been happening. If you were getting off work, what's the first thing you do, and how comfortable you are at home? And I'll give you some time to think about that. Okay. Do I got a brave soul that'll tell me or feel comfortable enough to share with me, what does home mean to you?
I'll go. Hi, my name is Jessica, and I work as a program vista at Chicago Hopes for Kids. And for me, home really means family. So I have the opportunity to work from home. And I actually was able to go back to my parents' home for a bit. And it was just so nice to have that time because, you know, there's so many things that were going on pre-COVID to be able to kind of slow down. And they were able to come back with me to my home in Chicago. Mm-hmm. And for me, having them here was so nice as well. So for me, I'm very close to my family. And so for me, you know, family means home.
Thank you, Jessica. Anybody else?
We have Erica Walker from the chat. Oh, I'm sorry. She just said home is a base of safety, love, comfort, restorations, and nurturance.
Okay. I was just going to yes and Erica's comment that I agree with all those things. And when you said to close your eyes and just picture what home meant, the first thing that came to my mind was like a breath of fresh air. It's a place you can just like let out, and hopefully you have like those things like family to keep you comfortable and to love you and all those good things. So I echo what Erica says.
Great. We got one other brave soul that would like to talk about what home means to them. Okay.
I would add, I think the family theme is common, but I think about the ability to care for others. I think comes through home. Gratitude for having a home is also the ability to feed others, provide others with shelter. I mean, it is kind of a means of taking care of family and people that you love.
Absolutely. Thank you guys so much for sharing. Now, I ask people this because the first thing that we think about with home, if I think of home, I think this is my place of peace. And this is where I come to relax. This is where I come to get my thoughts together, take care of my child. Our lives have been disrupted, and now home has become our everything these days. But I start off this way, especially when we're talking about folks who are experiencing homelessness, simply because there's well over 800 young people in the city of Chicago alone who cannot share that same experience with us. And so that experience doesn't look the same for some of us because of different privileges or lack of privileges that we do have. And so when we're talking about young people who are experiencing homelessness, or people in general who are experiencing homelessness, this is a topic that most times they can't speak to. They can't understand. And so that sometimes means that home is under a viaduct. Home is at my cousin's house. Home is, maybe at my dad's house on Monday, and the rest of the week I'm trying to figure it out. Home is at a shelter, and so, and then if you talk to some people, they don't know what home is because it's never been a home. Maybe it's just been a house. And so I encourage you all to think about those things when you're thinking about young people or just people in general who are experiencing homelessness, what that feels like when we do have a home to go to. Okay. So I'm going to share a video with you, and that video will also help you to, potentially see some of the young people that I've served and I've worked with over time, but it'll also give you an idea of what some young people are experiencing during their time of being homeless.
My father and my mother weren't in my life.
What led to me being homeless was a fight with my brother. He tried to stab me, and I feel like it wasn't safe living with him anymore.
To me, I feel like it was the hardest thing I ever had to do, being homeless.
Oh, Dr. Foster, we can hear the audio, but we can't see the video.
Oh, okay. Give me 1 second. Let's stop sharing. I'm going to switch you into a different, because I didn't switch the screen. There we go. Better? Can you guys see that? Okay. Perfect.
My father and my mother weren't in my life.
What led to me being homeless was a fight with my brother. He tried to stab me, and I feel like it wasn't safe living with him anymore.
To me, I feel like it was the hardest thing I ever had to do, being homeless.
As an agency, we believe that these young people have the capacity to create new lives for themselves. What they need is support. Our goal is to stand with them in their journey to a better life.
They helped me with housing, have something in my stomach at night, make sure I accomplished all my goals. They helped me save money.
It really changed my life because it gave me a second chance. It gave me hope to know, like, there's programs out there like that. Like, I want to spread the word.
My support group, my circle, is made up of all of the people that I've met through Ignite.
A stable living environment that helped me finish and actually graduate. Then they helped me get into college, which I really wanted to do.
It's really important to recognize that the young people know what they have to do, but don't have the support that the average young person their age does. We want to provide that space. We want to provide that stability from the chaos.
If I didn't find this program, I think I'd probably be on the street somewhere.
If it wasn't from Ignite, I'll probably be on the streets or worse.
If people invest in Ignite, they are investing in young people, in the potential of a young person being employed, being safe. We want them to be Chicagoans, and we want them to feel that they're part of the city. It cannot be a lost generation.
Now I'm excited to go to school. I'm excited to dream, to aspire, to have ambitions.
Now it's time for the real world. Yeah, I've been doing it, but now this is it. This will be my first apartment ever, so I'm very excited about it. They are providing me with everything that I'm going to need to move in. So it's a wonderful program, and I'm very excited to join in it.
My life just changed, honestly, because when I walked in, it felt like family. It felt like home. I was welcomed by everyone. Everyone deserves a second chance.
All right, so that's just a shameless plug of where I work and some of the work that we do with young people. I wanted to share that because it at least allows you to get somewhat of a story of young people and what they are experiencing, but also how some organizations and programs in the city of Chicago are designed to help them in the situations that they may be in. What you'll hear me say throughout this training is that we don't want to say homeless people. We don't want to say homeless youth. We want to say individuals or young people who are experiencing homelessness. Okay. And so I say that simply because it does not define them. It is just a situation that they have encountered and something that has, this is where they are right now in their life. This does not determine where they are going to be. Okay. And so just like we may be experiencing something at the time does not mean that that is always going to be what we are experiencing. Okay. And so if I challenge you to do anything, and this will also be my call to action the entire time of this training, is that you change your language and we say that young people who are experiencing homelessness, because the work that we do, we hope that this is not going to be their end all, and that this is not something that they will recycle in and go back to once they hear about different services or different programs throughout that time. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen again, so we'll go back and we're going to do like a little icebreaker, but I'll ask for you guys to kind of do a popcorn style, but we'll only take like maybe 4 people. So I'll have whatever Brave Soul wants to kind of start off, and we'll do it that way. And then popcorn style means you pick the next person. Okay. And so let me share my screen again, and then we'll get started. Okay. So the icebreaker is sometimes we forget. Okay. This is to help you ground yourself before we really get into some of the tough topics of redlining, racism, trauma, things of that nature, because these topics can be very hard to discuss. It can be hard to hear, but it is also educational and informative for people to understand, especially during this day and time where we are experiencing what I like to say 2 pandemics, one being COVID-19 and the other being the loss of Black Lives Matter. Okay. So this icebreaker is sometimes we forget. So I'm going to ask a question, and then once I ask that question, whoever that brave soul is, I'll ask that you follow through suit with what my question will be, create your own question, and ask the next person. Okay. So my first one would be, can you shop for things in any store in any neighborhood?
Can you repeat the question, Dr. Foster?
Absolutely. Can you shop for anything, clothes, hygiene products, whatever, in any store and in any neighborhood?
Yes, I can.
Okay.
I do that.
Okay. So I'm going to ask you to create, and the way that I'm formulating these questions is based on oppression, privilege, and underprivilege. Okay. So some people can go in some neighborhoods where other people feel uncomfortable going in other neighborhoods. So if you can formulate a question around that and you pick the next person of who you want to answer that.
Lauren, do you feel that when you come into another neighborhood, do you feel safe as you feel in your neighborhood?
I would say to an extent, yes. Let's see. Manuela, do you feel like you can access green spaces anywhere, like parks?
Yeah, for me it's a little bit different because I live in Wisconsin. So yeah. So yeah, for the most part, yes. But then I mean I have lived in Chicago for a few months, and yeah, I guess I'm still getting to know Chicago, but I have been able to find green areas. Yeah. Okay, let's see. Okay, Jessica. Hold on. Do you feel like you're treated the same way as everyone around you?
So for me, I think it depends on like the situation, the context. I think for me, my identity as a Black woman, you know, I know that, and I know that others see that, and I'm aware of that every single day. And I know that I am treated differently because of maybe someone else's view about who I am. So yes, but also at the same time, if I'm around, family, friends, they treat me with respect and love. So for me, it just depends. Yeah. Do I need to ask someone a question?
No, we're good. Yeah, we can go. Thank you guys for participating. That trust me, doing trainings like this is really difficult. It's really hard, but I like I said earlier, I like to keep people engaged. I wanted to do something like this because it gets us grounded in who we are as a person, what our privileges are, and what we are underprivileged in. And it helps us to see other people in different situations differently than what we live every single day. And so an example that most times I use with the staff who work at Ignite is that when we bring young people in to stay in those spaces, the biggest thing is we give them their own room. And the smallest thing that we think that they're supposed to know how to do is make up a bed. And we're like, well, we can't assume that they always had a bed to be able to make that bed up just because we made up a bed, or someone taught us how to do that. But sometimes we forget those things and we have to get grounded in the work that we do and get grounded in things that we need to be able to understand from a different perspective. Okay. I know we've been kind of talking and sharing a lot. Does anybody have any questions? If so, drop them in the chat, or hey, just cut me off. Dr. P is totally fine to interrupt me, and I will more than likely stop and answer your question. So I'm going to kick this off because this is what we're talking about is youth homelessness and what that means. And I want to kind of give some hot spots because there will be a lot to talk about throughout this week. But what does homelessness look like? And so I'm going to talk about this myth about youth homelessness. And so for the most part, when I go out and I ask young people about how other young people experience homelessness and what it looks like, like, oh, they're probably dirty, they probably don't have any food, or their shoes are messed up, or things of that nature. And they automatically assume what people normally see on the street. They're begging for money, they're looking for food, they're digging in garbage cans. But the reality of that is they look like a regular teenager. They look like a regular kid that's walking up and down the street, that goes to school, that does all of the regular things that any other kid. They will probably more than likely look the same. Okay. And so how most of the times we try to move away from this myth of what homelessness is supposed to look like is being able to identify and work with young people about the language of what homelessness is. Okay. And so you'll hear things like the instability of housing. What is instability of housing, or how does that look? You'll hear terms like double up or stacked up. And so Those terms such as double up and stacked up means that, hey, potentially I'm staying at home with my mom, and my mom has now taken on maybe her uncle's children, and that's 5 other people in a 2-bedroom house or apartment rather. Okay. That's stacked up. And if those people do not have a place to sleep, a bed to sleep in, or a room to call their own, that is called housing instability. Okay. And that's also called stacked up. In Chicago public schools, there's well over 20,000 young people who are experiencing housing instability. Half of that is because most of the time it is stacking that is happening, or double up housing. Okay. Those young people will not come and say, hey, I'm homeless, because they don't feel like they're homeless. They don't feel like they're experiencing anything of that sort, because one, as we know, young people are not going to come up and feel comfortable enough to just say, hey, I'm experiencing homelessness. But there will be some young people where you have to decipher through, what is this person experiencing? Is this person really experiencing homelessness, or is it stacking up? Is it housing instability? The fight that we have on a day-to-day basis doing this level of work is helping the state government to understand that housing instability is experiencing homelessness. If a young person does not have their own room and their own bed to sleep in, or even just their own bed, they're at risk of anything in their household, or coming out of their household, not getting the proper needs that they potentially could have, such as food and things of that nature. And so we try to move away from these myths about what youth homelessness looks like, but there are ways that you can identify young people who have homelessness. So our work, even with Chicago Police Department, is helping them understand that if you see a young person who has large backpacks, looks like they're traveling with a lot of clothes, looks like they're traveling with, things, and it doesn't look like they're going to the laundromat, but they're gathered with so much stuff all the time, they're in the same areas, they're on the same train stations, more than likely that young person is experiencing homelessness. And so agencies like Ignite do levels of street outreach where they can go and provide those services to them. But most times, like I said, young people will not come and just talk about that up front. Okay. What are the causes for youth becoming homeless? Some of the contributing factors, statistics, and some of the stats. As I stated earlier, there's well over 800 young people every single night who are experiencing homelessness. Okay. That means that they're sleeping in areas such as, like I said, on the trains. They will ride the trains all night long, and that's where they will rest. They will do something, if anybody has heard, couch surfing. Couch surfing allows you to say, one night I'm staying at my uncle's house, next night I probably stay at my cousin's, the last 3 nights I probably stay with my friend. That's couch surfing. I'm house hopping from one house to the next. That is not stability, and that's not safe either, as well, for young people to be, to have to do that. But some of the contributing factors to that could be, and most people think that, oh, some people get 18, parents kick them out. But a lot of this, which we'll talk about a little bit later, stems from trauma in the household. Okay, you can have some situations where we have young people who identify as LGBTQ. Parents do not agree, and they're asked to leave the home, and then they're fending for themselves. A lot of young people experience some type of negligence or abuse, and that leads them to being on the street. Most of the times, a lot of the times, adults who have children are evicted from homes. When they're evicted from homes, they are not able to take all of their children into a shelter with them. And so they are only allowed to take an allotted amount. And sometimes boys are not allowed in women's shelters, which then leads to a lot of young people kind of left to figure out, what's my next step. And so there's different ways, different things. And some of the common things that people think, like, oh, they got too old, or they were disrespectful, or they were rude and they got kicked out of their home. That's not always the case. Have I experienced young people who have had homes that you would think would be really nice, and they got 2-parent home, and somehow they end up in our program? Yes. And then I've had experiences where those 2-parent homes are not as pretty as we think they are from the outside looking in. Okay. And so just, you know, to kind of give you a background on some of what some of the young people may experience. All of the contributing factors won't look the same, but one of the common things that all of them will experience is that one trauma, and that's being homeless, and that's experiencing that level of not knowing where I'm going to sleep the next night, where I'm going to get my next meal, and how I'm going to survive from day to day. Okay. Does anybody have any questions before I move forward? Or is there any in the chat, Chanel, that I should know about? No? Okay, great. What impact does unstable housing have on a young person? So as you saw in the video, it does contribute, of course, to an interruption in employment, an interruption in school, and making sure that those young people get an education. I've had young people that have not finished high school and are at 19 and now trying to figure out, how do I finish up school, and I don't want to get a GED. There are programs that will assist young people in that, but these things interrupt the pattern of their daily lives. And then most times, I'll say this, and if anybody, you know, want me to kind of clarify this, some of the impacts are risky. We don't always understand the risky things, especially as adults who may not agree with the things that young people do. But the risky behaviors are considered survival tactics for them. So one of the biggest survival tactics that we've experienced outside of substance abuse and substance use has been survival sex. And so those things allow young people to move from one place to the next. And this is the way that they pay their way to have somewhere to sleep, somewhere to get food, and things of that nature. And so those things are not always pleasing to hear, but we also understand that these are things that young people feel they need to do and have to do in order to survive. Okay. We have a question.
Yeah, I have a quick question.
Yeah.
So I'm picking up that when we're talking about youth, we're talking about adolescence, but I'm wondering if you have any insight into maybe how we can recognize youth who are sort of in between. So maybe like 10 to 14 or something like that, where they're not as experienced or independent as adolescents, but still a bit older than younger children. I'm kind of wondering if you have any insight into maybe how we can recognize those youth, if they're experiencing homelessness, or if they're experiencing any of these like survival techniques that are, you know, survival techniques and survival strategies that you're discussing.
Absolutely. So just so I want to be clear and kind of answer your question, Erica. Most of the time when I speak youth, I'm speaking from ages 14 to 26, and some people will even challenge 26. But if you know how the brain works, the brain is still developing at that time, and so we go all the way up until 26. Okay, but what I will say just about learning. And anybody that is under the age of 14, and I'll make sure that I provide resources towards the end too, so that you all will have those things to be able to work with young people who are under the age of 14 as well. But these things look the same. It looks the same in every young person. Sometimes if they are outside of the household, it may be even easier to pick up with the younger person who's under the age of 14. But also we have to understand what comes with that, and it may be more trauma that's involved, where a young person may be attending school. I think one of the situations we had, and although we don't take young people who are 14 and over, where somebody was a little bit younger than that, and I think she was 12, she was coming to school and they had to provide her with things such as like to bathe herself. She would start coming early. And so those things were noticeable. But there may be things that you could also look like that relates to the same thing between a 14 to 26-year-old. I just would pay attention to their mannerisms and how they respond, how they talk, how they communicate, and try to pick up on those things during that time of that conversation. I wouldn't say that a 10-year-old will probably be trugging around, because I've noticed a lot of our 14 to probably 16-year-olds don't trug around a lot of clothes and items like that. We only see that most times with our 18 to 26. not too long ago is a guy that created something called a city pack. The bag is huge. You can't miss it. And so I tell a lot of people, if you see the city pack, it's a huge black book bag. It has city pack on it. If you see that, 9 times out of 10, the young people, those young people or just persons in general are experiencing some level of homelessness. But I hope I answered your question as much as I can, Erica. Okay. So like I stated, the impact that happens and the interruption, of course, in education and employment, trauma, the health impact, a young person could have experienced some level of trauma at, let's just say, 10. By the time they're 15, they're experiencing homelessness. And let's say that trauma at 10 was like abuse. Now, on top of that, I'm experiencing homelessness. This trauma now builds on top of each other. And this is the way that they manage throughout their lives, right? And so when they get into programs like Ignite, it's very difficult and very hard to disrupt a pattern that has been happening for so long. And so we try our very, very hardest to, create plans and safety plans and things of that nature for young people who come to us at 18 and 19 who's had several levels of trauma, okay? So disruption in family and or connection of caring adults, that looks different on every level, whether they're 14 or 26, or sometimes it looks the same. And so people who have lost relationships with their parents, has never had a relationship with their parents, that could also be a very big disruption with young people who are experiencing homelessness, okay? We're gonna move on to the next slide because we got a lot to kind of cover. So I want to kind of move us into, and I'm going to try to flow this as much as possible, but talk about how some of our young people have experienced this level of segregation in Chicago, and why they are experiencing homelessness in certain areas. Okay, so I'm going to play a video, and then after that, if you guys have any questions, please feel free to ask those, and we'll kind of keep going through redlining and just racial segregation in the city of Chicago. Most of the things that I will talk about will be geared towards Chicago. I know we have somebody on here that's living in Wisconsin, but for the most part, we're going to talk about the city and kind of get more insight into racial segregation, gentrification, things of that nature. Okay. I'm going to share my screen again.
There are two faces to the city of Chicago. First, you see its spectacular downtown next to Lake Michigan, with its famous theaters and incredible architecture. Top that off with some of the most passionate sports fans in the country. You get the picture. But the other face of Chicago is known for its violence and the thousands of lives lost in recent years.
One child is killed in Chicago every week.
And this is the face of Chicago that seems to dominate the headlines and the national conversation surrounding the city.
You walk down the street, you get shot. In Chicago, they've had thousands of shootings, thousands. And I'm saying, where is this? Is this a war-torn country?
But this narrative of carnage, of endemic violence, is incomplete. I know this because I'm from Chicago. It's a beautifully diverse place with a population almost evenly split between Black, white, and Latino Americans. But Chi-Town is also one of the most racially divided cities in the United States. Most of these ethnic groups live in different neighborhoods separated by geography.
Segregation is like air and water. We just live it, we just breathe it. We don't really think about it. It's just sort of how things are.
I wanted to find out how Chicago got this way and how its segregation led to so many of its problems. Chicago's segregation is best explained on a map. You have your north side, you have your south side, and you have your west side. To the east is the lake.
Those terms, north, south, and west, have subtle meanings that relate to the racial segregation of Chicago. And so when you say the north side, people are sometimes subtly meaning the white side. And the south side, especially today, is predominantly Black. And so when you say the south side, you are subtly meaning the Black side.
Chicago is very territorial. Like for me growing up, it was, okay, I know not to go to Bridgeport. Like this is a place that's not really welcoming to African Americans.
This geographic segregation is no accident. It was engineered over years of deliberate policies. In the early 1900s, Chicago was largely a city of white immigrants. The Great Migration of the 20th century brought millions of Black Americans out of the violent Jim Crow South, hoping for a better life. By the end of the 1940s, nearly 500,000 Black Americans lived in Chicago, mostly in a small corridor on the South Side called the Black Belt. As the Black population increased, they faced housing practices that were completely racist and yet completely legal. One of the worst was a practice called redlining, which allowed banks to refuse home loans to Black residents wanting to move into mostly white neighborhoods. This happened to cities nationwide, from Chicago to Oakland to Baltimore. Realtors and homeowners signed restrictive covenants saying they wouldn't sell to Black families in those white neighborhoods. And after World War II, the federal government subsidized white veterans with low-interest loans for fresh new homes in suburbia, complete with big yards and highways to get there.
The federal government was basically saying neighborhoods that are racially integrated are high risk neighborhoods, and so we're not going to insure those mortgages in those neighborhoods. So they were supporting a suburbanization that led to predominantly white suburbs and predominantly Black urban neighborhoods.
Meanwhile, realtors often participated in shady practices.
There were brokers that would go into a block and they may move a minority female with her 4, 5, or 6 children into a 2-bedroom house. And they would go down the block telling folks, well, they're here, your values are going to depreciate, your daughters will be raped, and which meant now what we can do is we can help you get out of here before it's too late.
Brokers would cheat those white homeowners by buying those homes at a low price, and then turn around and cheat the Black homeowners by selling them those same homes at an inflated rate. These practices continued even after the Fair Housing Act of 1968, which made it illegal to refuse to sell or finance a home based on someone's race. But not all realtors were so deceptive. Frank, who opened his real estate office in 1971, has often been credited with integrating the Beverly neighborhood on Chicago's South Side.
Our office windows were being broken, and there was demonstrations, and that very year, the community organization was asking that I would sign an anti-solicitation list, which meant that I would not solicit nor sell within those communities.
But Frank refused to back down and continued to sell to Black families. The neighborhood retaliated. Mobs marched on his real estate office. Neighborhood ladies would call and tie up his phone lines all day long so he couldn't get business. Frank was investigated multiple times over the years in an effort to stop his work. And things got worse when Frank and his wife, who's white, decided to buy their own home.
I was prepared to do what was necessary to buy it, but we rejected for how long?
They still managed to buy it, and a year later, in 1975, that home was targeted.
It was one evening, I guess about 8 o'clock, the sun was going down, etc. And, my wife and I and the 2 girls and our number 2 son was in the house. Number 1 son had not gotten home yet. And boom, at the front door, that was a bomb, a Molotov cocktail, that was placed, within the mailbox, and boom.
Frank's family survived the incident, but the front of the house was destroyed, and the kids who placed the bomb, they were never prosecuted. So if Black families couldn't get loans to move to the suburbs or white neighborhoods in the city, what was left for them?
Black folks were living in the older parts of the city where overcrowding had very much led to the deterioration of housing in Black neighborhoods. And so Black Chicagoans needed decent, safe, affordable housing.
The answer in the post-war era was public housing.
Public housing was welcome. These were brand new buildings built in a style that at that time was awesome. These high rises with elevators and with big green spaces in front of them. So public housing began as paradise for many families. It was an escape from what was deteriorating housing after many decades of overcrowding. So that was the golden age of public housing in the 1940s, 50s, early 60s.
But these paradises were also isolating, and by the 70s and 80s, these high-rises became as bad as the housing they sought to replace, with a concentration of poverty that led to violence, gangs, and drug abuse. As a result, support for public housing waned.
Through their sheer force of humanity, had to maintain their own community because the city and the federal government had very much abandoned them.
I remember these high-rise buildings like Cabrini Green and the Robert Taylor homes, which everyone called the projects. Family and friends told us not to go there. My high school English teacher called them prisons for the poor. In 2000, the city started demolishing them to try to clean up the neighborhoods. But today, while the projects may be gone, many of the people who lived in them are still suffering from the effects of poverty.
What happens is that people think that this is only a Chicago issue. You know, Baltimore, Detroit, Philadelphia, urban places in this country are all dealing with these same issues, a legacy of segregation that has roots in housing, inequity, and violence comes along with that.
These cities continue to suffer from their divisions. From 1955 to 1970, 62% of blacks and only 4% of whites across America were raised in poor neighborhoods. Half a century later, those numbers haven't changed. Yes, the whites-only signs are gone, and the rate of black poverty has decreased. But the scars of a segregated city run deep, from poor healthcare access to lack of jobs, and yes, violence. And all of this makes me wonder, how do these color lines affect the city's most vulnerable, its kids?
Chicago. Okay, so I wanted to share that video just because it gives a little bit more of a basis to redlining, and it gives a more basis to racial segregation here in the city of Chicago, and it's a little bit more familiar because we can, you know, probably pick out some of the pictures that they show and some of the areas that they also talked about. And so I'm gonna share my screen again so that you can see my presentation. And then we'll talk a little bit about, and if, like I said, if anybody has some, I don't know if these are questions in the chat or not, but I'll check those once we share the screen or not. No? Okay, perfect. So let's keep talking. And then if, like I said, if you guys have any questions, please let me know. So redlining, I did a lot of my research for my doctoral program around Black Chicago, okay? And so that's the term that I like to coin and use, because most times we just say Chicago, but a lot of Black people have identified Black Chicago when it relates to redlining, okay? And so redlining is pretty much like this way of what she explained of how they discriminated against giving loans to people of color and allowing them to be housed in certain areas. So there's this map, and it's not like that CTA map there. Those are just our our train lines, which also speaks to redlining as well. But in this map, color coded different areas of where you could, what was deemed unsafe and safe areas. And so all of the areas that were deemed unsafe were color coded red. Most of those areas fell into our Inglewood area, our West Garfield area, our West Inglewood area, our Fuller Park area, Humboldt Parks area. All of those areas were considered to be unsafe areas. Even after the Fair Housing Act, which happened in 1968, which was supposed to outlaw pretty much, you know, or protect rather others from discrimination of getting this housing, they still continue to do it. And so what you saw on the video, of course, was all of those, what we like to call ghetto or project building. Some of those buildings are still standing, some of them are not, which leads into a conversation about gentrification as well. But even after the Fair Housing Act and all of that took place in 1968, what happened was that they just grouped people together in these large buildings and pretty much tried to coin it as this is a way to build community. And what I tell most people is that what you hear now is like, oh, Black on Black crime and this happens. Well, what we notice is that when you have a group of people together in one space at one time, there's going to be something that's going to happen. There's going to be violence. And so I'm a firm believer in the term of Black, not believing in the term Black on Black crime, because there's all type of crime. There are people who are white that kill other white people. There are Hispanics who kill other Hispanics people. But the conversation most times shifts to Black on Black crime because it helps to change the narrative of the conversation. And so I would have to say that when we have been grouped into different neighborhoods and different areas, those things help create what we like to see, violence and chaos and anything else that you would see in large amounts of people in one spot. And so those things definitely continued after Fair Housing Act and still continues to this day. It may not be as prevalent, it may not be as open, but it still takes place today. Okay. Racial housing segregation. If you notice, I would say Chicago is probably the most racially segregated city that I've ever been ever been to. And I say that simply because when you hear places like, oh, I'm going to Chinatown. Oh, I'm going to Greek town. Hey, I'm going to this area. Or all of the Latinas or Latinos stay in this area. And just like the woman stated on the video, when you hear North Side, you think white, you think amazing, you think this is safe, you think this is great. When you hear the South Side and you hear the West Side, you think Black, you think poverty, you think lack of resources. All of these things are grouped with the different areas. And that was created, racial segregation was created by the government. How these different things have circulated, how they've happened, all stemmed from Redlining, Fair Act. All of these things are connected in a certain type of way. The sad part is that we're still experiencing that today. There, which is one of the questions where I think earlier during the icebreaker, do you feel comfortable in your neighborhood or something like that, or if you come to a different neighborhood? Those are real questions. Those are real things that people experience every single day. Am I going to feel comfortable? And I'll give you an example. A lot of my young people, when I ran one of our programs that were in our clustered and scattered sites apartments program, you can live anywhere in the city of Chicago as long as they fall within this amount of rent, and we'll pay for it, we'll take care of it. Everybody's like, I want to move to the north side because it's safe up there. And we're like, well, it's some safe areas over here too that you can live in. But that is the mindset that people go to. And so we want to be able to remove that. And help people understand that although we like to see the pretty side of Chicago, there's also a rough side of Chicago as well, and we are well aware of that. But that mindset has definitely creeped into a lot of young people, into a lot of people, and that's what keeps the racial housing segregation more prevalent here in the city of Chicago, which then leads to racial wealth gap. Okay. And so a lot of people would like to say that there's myths of that. Hey, more Black people need to save more. They need to be this, and they don't spend their money where they need to spend their money. And those are myths. There's a lack of resources in neighborhoods. Okay. And without the resources, how do young people, how do people in general learn these things? And so when you don't have the opportunity, when you don't have the schools that provide these things or provide the opportunities for the young people or for people just in general, there will always be this gap of wealth. Okay. Where there is wealth, people pour more into that, versus when there isn't wealth, people will not pour into it, which leads to the lack of resources that are on the South Side or the West Side of Chicago. And I say that we have to make sure that we close these gaps, because it's important to understand when you're in neighborhoods like, I took some notes of you guys, some of the richer parts of Chicago. And I'll tell you that the housing income of some of them is Lincoln Park. The housing income is somewhere around $100,000. Somebody makes that much money there in those houses. Forest Glen, I'm gonna be honest, I don't even know where that is. So, but somebody's making somewhere between $117,000 to $120,000 a year in these homes. And then you come into the South Side, or you come into the West Side of Chicago, these more low poverty areas. So like Fuller Park, Inglewood, West Inglewood, they're making well under $50,000 a year, with the expectation that the schools are supposed to be different, the education is supposed to be different. We're supposed to, pull yourself up by the bootstraps. Those things are impossible with what is being poured into those communities. And so this racial wealth gap will continue, because the wealth is just pouring more into the wealth, versus how do we get that spread it across our city, where there's more wealth that's poured into the smaller communities, and I'm going to say smaller Black communities, to give more back so that they can have the resources to gain. So like financial literacy, understanding how to save, understanding what budgeting is. Those things are important. And when we're talking about gentrification, I've taught a lot of young people about the Hyde Park area and just in general about gentrification. And so a lot of young people who go into that area, they've told me, hey, Hyde Park just feels like the black downtown. And I said, well, what does that mean? And so most people will say, well, it's nice. They built a whole lot of stuff there and we can go there. And, they got a hotel there now and they got all of these different places. And I've helped them understand that that's also called gentrification. And so at one point, that neighborhood was built with the mind of Black people. It was. But when certain things came into the neighborhood, the property value went up, the property taxes went up, all of these things increased, which then slowly pushes a lot of Black people out of those neighborhoods. One thing that I will say about Hyde Park is that although there has been gentrification, the Black culture continues in that neighborhood. And those are things that continues to, certain block parties still happen, certain events still take place, certain Black-owned businesses are still in those neighborhoods. And so gentrification has been a process of how to kind of move folks out, bring up the property value, and then let's change what the community looks like, which then leads to a lot of people being homeless because now I can't afford to live in this neighborhood anymore. Now I can't afford to pay for the food or anything in these surrounding areas. So these are all big topics to think about when you're talking about homelessness, and you're talking about homes, and understanding the Black community, but also understanding how unfair it could be for someone to maybe I am staying in the Inglewood area, or I'll just say Washington Park because this is the area that is being that they're pouring more into now. Maybe I was staying there at one point. They're trying to shape the area up, and now I got to move out. Where do I go? Where can I afford? What's next for me? And so all of these topics are really important when you're thinking about young people or just people in general who are experiencing homelessness. Are there any questions?
Yes, we have one from the chat from Beverly.
Yeah.
Do you feel many areas aren't renting to individuals not because of the skin color, but also the ages of their children? And how is that hindering the process of homelessness?
Absolutely. What we have allowed a lot of people to understand, and I can speak from this just because I talk to a lot of young people, their first go-to is public assistance, is public aid, right? And so if we do not give them the tools, and not saying that we don't provide the CHA wait list and all of those things to get them into housing, because we do, but we also want to be able to support them in every area and help them feel like they can do those things on their own without the assistance of the government. But a lot of the times people feel as if they do need this. They need this assistance to be able to find a place to stay. So yes, a lot of people do not get rented to. If you get a young person who has worked, and I could tell you of one young person that I know for certain that has worked at McDonald's, has been she's been a manager there for the last 5 years. She went through one of our programs, got out of that program, started working, could not find housing. She has 4 children. They would not rent to her because of the environment that they thought the building was going to be created as. It was going to be chaotic. You have too many children. And those are things that people experience every day, not just young people, but all types of folks. They will not rent to certain people or will not provide loans to certain folks because of the areas that they're in, because of their circumstances and their situations. Another thing that a lot of people experience just in general is that if you have a felony on your record, if you have any type of background, a lot of people will not rent to you. They don't want you to bring that type of environment or negativity into their spaces, into their apartments or their neighborhoods. And so these are definitely things that are still happening and still going on a day-to-day basis. Yes. Any other questions? I hope I was able to answer that question for you, Beverly.
Oh, Erica, do you want me to read out your comments?
Sure.
Yeah, okay. Well, yeah, we have a few comments from Erica as well, talking about land access and land ownership are the backbone of systematic racism. Absolutely. Herding people into limited spaces, destroying or devaluing their property/communities, using loopholes and legalized tactics to swindle people, etc. Hyde Park was built as a suburb and is zoned for housing and businesses. Later areas like the Southwest Side are zoned differently, less walkable. And then commenting on your last euphemisms used to exclude people from housing.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Erica. Erica, we can do this again together if you want to. Thank you. Thank you. No, that is all absolutely true. Um, and I think all of this resonates with people, and I hope that you guys could understand it from a different perspective, and understand that different neighborhoods produce different things, but how other people may perceive that, and the comfort level of people traveling to these neighborhoods. The last thing that I'll pull up, or that I'll show you guys on this slide, is this CTA red line. I said this has a lot to do with redlining, because if you notice, these goes to different areas. The red line comes from the south side and goes all the way north, right? And all of these different things were shifted so that you can go to different neighborhoods. Most people that I know don't even access half of the time the pink line or the brown line, because these go into the more prominent or privileged neighborhoods, right? The red line, the blue line, the green line, and the pink line are heavily accessed in the Black community, because it gets you from point A to point B, gets you from one neighborhood to the next. But all of these things are related to redlining and how racial housing segregation is still continuing even in the city of Chicago. Okay.
Oh,
go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. Yeah, and we have another question from Joanne.
Mm-hmm.
Why does the city of Chicago not support areas with infrastructure they need?
Say that again for me.
Why does the city of Chicago not support areas with the infrastructure they need?
Well, I think it goes back to everything that we talked about. I think the city pours into what they want to pour into in different neighborhoods. I think that certain neighborhoods like Inglewood and West Inglewood, and those neighborhoods, they don't see use of those areas, and so they won't pour into those areas. If the violence is high, if the poverty is high, they won't give those resources. One of the biggest neighborhoods that I would say, if you on 63rd and Halsted, there was a lot of money poured into that neighborhood more recently, where there's a Whole Foods there, there's a Starbucks there, there's all of these different areas, and you ask those people in that community if they wanted that, they'll tell you no. They didn't look, because then that brings in people who they do not know, they've never seen before in those neighborhoods, to their neighborhoods, and it is begin to shift. We go back to gentrification. It shifts their environments. It shifts how do I feel comfortable enough walking up the street? Can I even afford the money, or could I even afford the food that's in the neighborhoods that now that they've placed in it? I can't afford Whole Foods or things of that nature. And so these are things that, like I said, it continues to happen. I think that people pour, or the government pours into where they want to pour into. I think that they like I said, wealth goes into wealth. And so I think that those areas such as Hyde Park, or such as 63rd and Halsted, there's a few other areas that they've done the same to, and folks in those communities didn't want that. But we can talk all day about like food deserts and things of that nature that contribute to the lack of poverty and things of that nature in those type of neighborhoods as well. I hope I was able to answer your question. I'm not for sure who asked that.
Yeah, and we also just have a few more comments about the CTA trains. And Alex mentioned her neighborhood isn't even on a CTA train. And then Erica said, fewer stops on the south side, red and green lines. And the green line was dismantled east of Cottage Grove, and several stops were decommissioned on the green line. And then Alex G says, Chicago goes into the 130s, yet stops within 95th, and that Erica was right. And then Erica also mentioned there also used to be private train lines that sent people directly to work. You can see the old tracks all through the south side now on the low end.
Yes, absolutely. Those, if we take the green line jumps from 63rd to 55th, from 55th to 47th. There's literally these large gaps of stops, so that you're not making a lot of stops in what they call the hood, because of the violence that takes place, because they don't want to put their conductors in any type of unsafe environment. All of these things happen. And then if you've noticed, I mean, I haven't did the public, and I stay next to a train, so if you hear that in the background, but for the most part, On the red line, where there's a lot more stops that's on the red line, which they like to contribute to a lot more violence that happens in those areas. So even if you've noticed, sometimes when there is something that has happened, the train will just ride past you real fast, and it doesn't stop. And they say those are the express trains. What I've learned is that if there is a person that does not feel comfortable with stopping in those different areas, they will put you on the express train and allow you not to be in all of those areas. So if I go from 79th, the next stop is going to be 95th. And so I've skipped at least 2 to 3 stops in between that. And so it's important to understand the different areas and the lines that are on the train. And whoever said that there's not even a train line that's even connected to where you live, the city is built around, you need public transportation to get from point A to point B, just alone in the city. So that's merely crazy to me. But even if if we talk about 95th Street now, the work that they just put in there, all of the money that they just poured into building that, I have no idea why we did that. It doesn't make sense to me, but it made sense to the city of pouring into that area. Okay. So we don't have a whole lot of time, but I love that you guys are engaging. This is amazing. So I want to kind of, keep talking through this. And so I talk about all of that stuff. We talk about segregation. We talk about race. We talk about gentrification, all of those things. And how does that lead to my trauma? How does that associate with the trauma that I experience on a day-to-day basis? As a young person, as a Black person, anybody, what does that look like for me? Okay. And so this war zone mentality, if you've heard it, if you have not heard it, I'm just going to teach you a little bit about it. Chirac has been this stamp that has been put on the city of Chicago. And so I learned this over time that is more connected to what genre of music that has been developed here in the city of Chicago, which is called drill music. And they connected that to that because at one point they said there was more killings here that was happening than it was in the war. And so this war zone mentality is that I walk around to protect myself. I walk around with this mentality that there could be anything that could happen to me at any point in time on any side. And so that mentality shifts how people live their daily lives. Young people who are experiencing homelessness on a day-to-day basis fear, because if I walk in the streets all night long, I don't know what's going to happen to me. I don't know how to protect myself. And then that does lead to a lot of arrests. It leads to a lot of violence. And just the lack of feeling protected. But what I will say, and this has come out of my own research, is that a lot of young people are now considered, war zone mentality is normalized. This is what we're accustomed to, hearing gunshots, walking outside to, police brutality, all of these things, we're accustomed to it. We this is the way Chicago is, and this is how we function on a day-to-day basis. Which then leads, of course, to different types of violence. Your domestic violence, you have your parent or child violence, all type of things that develop in this, even in smaller segregated neighborhoods that still have up row houses. So like your areas like on 63rd and I think like 64th and King Drive, which is Parkway Gardens. That's still a very segregated small neighborhood project that has a lot of violence that is still compared, and they have not shut that building down. They have not knocked those buildings down at all. The Augiel Gardens, those gardens are still up. And so these are different places that, are still standing. And the bigger ones that they talked about, Robert Taylor Homes and Ida B. Wells buildings and all of these different buildings that stood for a very long time, there are still smaller areas that are built like that hold all of this level of trauma, violence, substance abuse, gangs, poverty, and the lack of resources that are not in those communities. These things that are listed here contribute or are additions to trauma that young people experience who are homeless every day. This is what they see. And so what I've told people more recently with this pandemic of Black lives is that our young people see this every day. We are now, because we're forced to sit at home and watch the TV and hear the news and watch the news, now we get a front row seat to what they see every single day, what they experience every day when they're walking through the streets, when they're trying to, you know, figure out what's the next meal, how am I going to do. This is what they see. Now we just have a front row seat at it. And so all of these things lead to more trauma. If I see violence every day, if I see people using, or I begin to use, and let me just say, even with substance abuse, this is a way that young people cope. This is a way that they suppress things that they're experiencing. This is a way that people would say, hey, you know, this is the only way I know how not to think about the stuff that's happened last night. This is the way that I don't even want to think about the fact that I'm homeless right now. And so where some of these things are looked at as negative and are looked at as, you know, harsh, these are also things that have kept young people rooted in things that they feel safe in, because this is all that they know. And so these are just understanding in different neighborhoods and different places. What does that war zone look like? What does Inglewood look like? Do I just see Inglewood from the news perspective, or do I see it from the perspective of the community members that live there? And so that's important, is when we see the TV and we see the news, all we hear is killing. Oh, they killed this kid and they shot this person. And that is how Chicago is portrayed. But then when you go into these neighborhoods like Inglewood, and you learn about the lack of resources that they have, you learn about the lack of books that they got in the school, the teachers that don't have the resources that they need to be able to teach, then you begin to learn, okay, this makes a lot more sense than what is being portrayed on the TV screen. Social media is a whole nother aspect, and where I did my research and how people have poured more into that. And that's where young people thrive from, is social media. That's the first thing to pick up their phone, and that's their level of news. That is how they live their lives every single day. And so that trauma continues because the pattern has not been interrupted. Okay.
Oh, and we have.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. We have some questions from the chat. Someone, Beverly asked, do you feel that that these current challenges can affect the developmental status of our children in their future? And what steps can we define change to the families we serve to relieve stress from not just the parents, but from their children?
Yes, there are different ways, and of course, all of these things could definitely affect children in all types of ways. Sometimes we don't even understand the way that they are being impacted by things that's going on around them. There are many programs in the city of Chicago, some that are the best kept secrets. I say that because Ignite has been around for 45 years and people still didn't know that we existed and worked with young people. There are so many different resources that can tap into to help young people, to help families to get on the right path, or to understand, how do I get out of a situation that I'm in? How do I understand the trauma that I'm experiencing? Bright Star Community Outreach is an amazing program that put money into trauma care for the city of Chicago. They created a trauma line where families could call in, they could talk, they can get free therapy, they can get free insight, they can get free legal. All of these things exist. It's just about making sure that you can get the resources that you need and find out about those things. They are an amazing program that we partner with, and we always make reference to them. Did you have another question, Chanel?
Yeah, or not questions, just comments. Erica says, my dad grew up in Parkway. I remember when it didn't have a fence. Now there is a security fence around it, complete with a security gate. And then Manuela also commented on the about substance abuse and said self-medicating. And then Alex mentioned Altjed, I hope I'm saying that right, Gardens is so disconnected from the city in terms of access, and it's constructed in a way that is meant to keep some people in and some people out. Also, an example of a severe food desert in Chicago.
Great. Absolutely. All of those things are absolutely correct. I like to say, a proud product of Altgeld Gardens. That's where I grew up at. And there absolutely is. It is built the same way. It's one way in, one way out. That's it. And we used to call it the maze, because once you're in there, you're stuck in there, which is why a lot of violent things happen. And a lot of people got away with a lot of things that took place in those type of areas. So just to kind of run through some of these things, just a different way to be able to respond to trauma is trauma-informed care. There's 5 guiding principles: safety, choice, collaboration, trustworthiness, and empowerment. And so how we apply these things to young people or just working with them, we understand that if you have experienced some level of trauma, you are operating in what we call the lower brain. When you're operating in the lower brain, that is fight or flee. I only know those 2 things to get out of this situation. Okay. And so a lot of our young people who are experiencing that level of trauma or experiencing homelessness, we have to approach them in the way that are guiding around these 5 principles. So safety, ensuring physical and emotional safety. So common areas are welcome. So understanding that this space is safe for you. It's okay to be safe here. If we're talking in my office, this is a safe space or a safe environment. If they're coming into a program, hey, this is safe here. I want you to feel comfortable. Make it comfortable. Make it safe for you. Choices. Individuals have choice and they have control. Clear and concise about the rights and responsibilities. Allow them. It is not your goal. It's not your way of handling things. It is up to them. It is on them to be able to make those choices for themselves. We are just there to be on the side of them and guide them through that journey. Okay. But that allows them to take power of their situation. Okay. Collaboration, sharing power and making decisions with them. Okay. And so that's not me walking behind you and giving you an extra push, because sometimes we know a lot of young people need that. But it's walking on the side of them and saying, hey, this is a process. I'm here to guide you. I'm here to help you. How do I help you make those decisions? And sharing the power with you, because we know sometimes we may have more wisdom than they do, but at the end of the day, it's their life, it's their experience, and how do we help them, guide them during that time? Okay. Trustworthiness, clarity, consistency, and interpersonal boundaries. I say interpersonal boundaries because it is so easy when we know a young person has experienced a lot of trauma for us to be mom, big sister, big brother, dad, and we jump into those roles when we don't need to be that. We need to be a support system. We are supporting them in what they need, but making sure that they can trust us and we can trust them, and walking on this journey with them. And empowerment. This is the biggest one. Prioritizing empowerment and skill building. How do I pour into you for you to advocate for yourself? How do I pour into you for you to be able to say, this is my right and this is how I'm going to do it? This is how I get out of poverty. This is how I find my own housing. How do I do that? So one of the biggest things that I'd like to brag about this, I had a young person come into the program. It's a 2-year program. We pay their rent, completely full subsidized housing. We took care of their travel. We took care of food, all of these, everything. All you need to do is to pay into your savings. That's it. And we were just teaching you how to pay rent. A young person came in and said, how do I make sure I save $10,000 in 2 years? I told her how. She did it. I empowered her to do it by saying, you can do it. This is how much you can do it. And this is the way that you can do it. Once I provided that information, it is now up to them to feel empowered that they can do it. She left that program in 2 years with $13,000 saved. So these are things that do work, even if a young person is experiencing trauma, even if a young person is experiencing homelessness or anything of that sort. It's okay for young people to come out of that rut. They don't have to stay there. They don't have to always be there. And so that is what Ignite does. We make sure that we're providing services to teens and young people. We were previously known as Teen Living Programs, and we changed our name about a couple of years ago, but we've been around for 45 years. We provide comprehensive continuum of services to young people between the ages of 14 to 26 who are experiencing unstable housing or homelessness. We work with each young person individually. Everybody has their own plan. Nobody is alike. Nobody is the same. The only common thing that they have is that they're experiencing the same trauma of experiencing homelessness. But we try to help and guide them to be self-sufficient adults. We have holistic models that we definitely make sure that we teach and we go through with our staff. One of them is our trauma informed care, which we kind of ran through a little bit. But these things are evidence based that works for young people. It works when you're working with young people who are experiencing homelessness or are caught up in things that we've talked about today. Okay. Accessing services in Chicago, just to kind of, if you guys want to write this stuff down, I know this is going to be sent to you too as well. But so if you need any services available for 14 to 17-year-olds, comprehensive community-based youth services, which is CCBYS, they are really, really great with working with that. So if you have a young person who's experiencing homelessness between 14 and 17, they will take it from there. They will make sure that they find somebody to house them, and they will do the work with reunifying the young person back with their family. Crisis intervention response system for assistance with placement of at-risk youth is also a really great program. Their number is here to provide working with young people who are ages 14 and 17 years old. Housing First, HUD. And so this is something that we use. And so if you have any young people who are ages 18 to 24, we use what we call a coordinated entry system. And we have skilled assessors who are present who will complete housing assessments for young people. And those housing assessments will allow them to be placed on a list to get matched to any type of transitional or permanent supportive housing. Our goal is always permanent, but some young people don't always fall into that category. Youth access points, we are one. Ignite is a youth access point for ages 18 to 24, where we have a drop-in resource center, and young people can come and get the services that they need. We call it a day shelter. Okay. Some of these other styles of housing and community-based programs, youth diversion programs, is through Catholic Charity. You have a young person who's like, hey, I can stay with my cousin, but I don't have the resources to pay them. They want me to give them like, let's say $50 a week. Tracy Blackburn works with Catholic Charities, and she's able to, provide the resources that you need. Youth drop-in centers, youth emergency beds, congregate and scattered site transitional housing, pregnant and parenting transitional housing, parent of supportive housing, housing navigation services as well. All of these fall in line with housing and community-based programs and are available to 18 to 24-year-olds. Most of this can be found on allchicago.org, and they are connected with HUD and can provide these services. But you can also, if you ever want to, I know my contact information is going to be provided as well in that follow-up email. Please contact me and I can connect you as well with different resources for anybody between the ages of 14 to 26. Thank you guys so very much for listening and being a part of this training. I hope that it was extremely helpful. I hope that you can take from this a different way of how we address homelessness, how we address racial segregation, redlining, and things of that nature, and how we see young people different who live in neighborhoods that are not as fortunate as maybe the ones that we're living in. I don't know. We got 2 minutes. Does anybody got like a question or something they want to ask?
Oh, yeah, there's some questions from the chat. Let's see where I lost my.
I'm gonna come out of this. Let's stop sharing so I can see everybody.
Yes. Joanne asked, as a teacher, how can I get access for my students who are experiencing trauma? And our counselors are not always giving them or their families places that are free or low cost, so they can get help.
So for what I would say, especially if it's a young person that's experiencing homelessness, every school should have what they call an STLS rep. That STLS rep will provide services directly to that young person. The Benito Act states that they cannot ask any questions. Are you really homeless? Do you really have nowhere to stay? You cannot do that. If a young person ever comes in and say, hey, I'm considered to be homeless, or I'm experiencing homeless, or I'm unstably housed, as that rep, they have to provide services to that young person, okay? And so they can connect them to programs like myself or the program that I work for, things of that nature, and they can get all of the services that they need. Okay, so that if you have everybody should have an STLS rep. The struggle is that sometimes the STLS rep is like the front desk person, or they double up on a lot of different things. So.
Oh, and also, do CCYBS services need to include housing? And is it sometimes mentoring and other support only? That's from Rita.
CCBYS is for the 14 to 17-year-olds, yes, and it is for reunification with families. They will provide housing to those young people, and they will make sure that they get the support that they need. The go-to is not to go to DCFS. That is our plan, to never go to that, but I will say that a lot of young people do end up going into the system. But if we can try to get around that and try to move away from that, that's the best bet. The point of CCBYS is always reunification back with families, and it's to find somewhere safe and stable for that young person to stay.
And the rest are all thank yous. So thank you.
That's good. Okay, thanks guys. Thank you so much for, like I said, for participating. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I know I can talk so much at points in time, but I hope you guys have a great rest of your week, and thank you so much for being a part of this training.
Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Foster.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Really,
thank you.
Your presentation. I'm so excited for the rest of the week. I cannot tell you enough how much we really appreciate your time. I think your topic was super relevant to the work that we do and really helps set the stage for the rest of the week. So I wanted to thank you for that. I wanted to let folks know who are still on the call that Chicago Hopes for Kids has put together a series of learning materials that we ran through with our staff over the summer. One does talk about redlining, and I just dropped the link in the chat if you'd like to look at it a little bit more. It can also be found on our website. And I did want to let everyone know that our call to action for this event is to hopefully encourage folks to donate to our snack drive. Community donations really are what helps us to provide snacks for all of our children across the 9 shelters we serve in Chicago. And so our snack drive right now is the biggest way that we're doing that. You'll have all the information in the follow-up email as well as to how you can do that, but I'll also drop the link to our Amazon wish list. And yeah, that's all that we have. Once again, thank you so much, Dr. Foster. We really appreciate it. And if you want to stay on the call, you and Chanel can wrap up really quickly. But for everyone else, thank you so much and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you guys. You have a good week.